Americans for Prosperity. I'll give you a 30-second blurb on who we are. We are a premier grassroots organization with 36 different chapters throughout the country. And our mission is to remove barriers in government that prevent people from reaching their full potential. One way we do that is by influencing government policy. We seek to empower all people to pursue their version of the American dream. I would like to thank everybody involved in planning this event, and that includes the Justice Administration and Criminology Club, the College Republicans, the Allegheny Highlands Libertarian Policy, UPJ, obviously,
I know that's my
beautiful
contraction.
room, Mike Kruska, who is the do-it-all, where's Mike? Right here. And of course, Dr. Ross Kleinstuber, and all of our panelists who will be introduced momentarily. I bet you're thinking that's an interesting group of people. How did we all come together? Well, at AFP, we live by one of Frederick Douglass's quotes that says, "I will unite with anybody to do right and with nobody to do wrong." So I think it's wonderful that a wide variety of organizations can come together and discuss issues with respectable debate and find common ground that ultimately will move Pennsylvania forward. And I think that's all of our goals, is to move our state and our country forward. So I'm gonna go over a couple quick housekeeping issues. Bathrooms are down the hall this way, to my right. There's plenty of food, beverage, and dessert. Whether you signed up for the meal or not, please feel free to help yourself. And then you also notice note cards on your table. So the way this is going to go is we will have a 1-hour Q&A with our panelists and our moderator. And then if you have questions throughout that discussion, you can write those down. And Mike and I will walk around the room as we get closer to the 1-hour mark and pick up the cards. And then we will select those and have a 30-minute Q&A. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome tonight's moderator to the podium, Dr. Ross Kleinstuber. Many of you know him as a professor here. He teaches Justice Administration and Criminology Sociology. He has his BA from Rowan University and his master's and PhD from the University of Delaware. Thank you so much for agreeing to host this wonderful event.
Thank you for having me. And welcome again to everybody. I thank everybody that's here for coming, and I want to extend a special thanks to our panelists for taking time out of their quite busy schedules to be here with everybody and share their perspectives and their views on everything. I think it'll be a lovely group of speakers tonight, giving us their different take on many controversial issues. Of course, criminal justice system is complex and varied, and there are lots of different moving parts, so we're not going to talk about everything tonight. We should think about tonight as sort of the beginning, not the end of a conversation. There's lots of different things that we will not be able to have time to talk about tonight that I think are important to discuss. So hopefully you'll go back and continue talking about these things tonight. But before we get into that, let's introduce our speakers. First, from Americans for Prosperity, we have Ashley Klingensmith, the State Director of the Pennsylvania chapter. Rob Coburn, the Chair of the Pennsylvania Libertarian Party. We have Dr. Christy Smith, the Resident Senior Fellow for Criminal Justice and Civil Liberties at the R Street Institute. And then, of course, our local elected leaders, Senator Wayne Langerholt, Senator from the 35th Senatorial District here in Pennsylvania. And Representative Jim Rigby from Pennsylvania's 71st Legislative District. He's also a former police chief. Which of course leads me into the beginning of our discussion. Probably one of the problems that most directly affects a lot of us dealing with the system today deals with police retention and recruitment. Police are, of course, our first responders. They're also the face of the criminal justice system, as we talk about a lot in my classes. They're the ones who interact with the public. They're the ones with the conspicuous uniforms. They're the ones we first think about when we think about the system and they kind of serve as the liaison between the public and the wider system. But a report from last year found that in Pennsylvania there are more than 1,200 vacant police positions in this state. And this, of course, is a problem. This has a potential to affect all of us in this state. And in order to address this concern, learn more about this concern, Senator Langerholtz has recently proposed Senate Resolution SR 21 to create a commission to study this issue, recruit, retrain police, and other law enforcement personnel. So, Senator Langerholtz, would you like to take a few minutes to discuss SR 21 for the audience, please?
Sure.
Good.
Okay. Everybody hear me? Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. Yes, then it does essentially what you said there, to study this issue, because it is an issue of paramount concern. And coming from my background, spending the better part of my career in law enforcement for many years as an assistant district attorney here in Cambria County, we are in dire need to hire and recruit more police officers. I don't think it's any secret what's happening and why anyone would want to go into this profession, seeing the state of affairs, sadly, what is happening across our nation. And in talking to individuals in various police departments in the state police, and seeing that numbers are down significantly, and how, what can we attribute that? I think we can attribute the climate, for one, for being that issue, but also we need to take a look at what we can do to recruit and retain more officers, because as we get that decreased pool of people and it's less competitive, our communities stand to suffer from that. So that's our hope, is to create this commission to take a look at this and come up with some good recommendations. We did this a similar resolution study a couple years ago. I believe Representative Rigby worked on this in the House as well, to recruit and retain more volunteer firemen, because we were facing that issue. We really got a lot of good recommendations that came out of that study, and I'm hopeful that we'll get recommendations we can implement with regard to this study.
Thank you. I'd kind of like to hear the other panelists' thoughts on some of the this concept of recruitment, retention. What do you think some of the best ways to try to recruit and retain more law enforcement personnel might be? Let's start with Ashley over here on my left.
Well, I would say we really need to take efforts within communities to collaborate with law enforcement. I think that's critical. I think you see some communities doing that really well. And I think you see others where there's like a very kind of difficult relationship. And so I think that's a really good way to make it a positive experience for those in service and those that they are serving. But yeah, I guess that would be my initial gut.
Representative Rigby?
Well, let's be clear, this is not something new. I've been in office 4 years. 4 years prior, I was chief of police, and we couldn't hire. We didn't have the numbers. My last year as chief, I believe 3 candidates came out of the police academy. In 1982, when I came out of the academy, I was one of 4 classes, each graduating over 30 students. And so I think this slowly crept up on us until where it finally bit us in the butt, and we now know where we are. But this is not a new issue, and when you look at small municipalities like my borough of Ferndale, where I'm expected to hire a policeman who's gone through the academy and start him at $8 an hour. This is just 8 years ago. They could go to Sheets and make more money. So, part of the retaining is financial. The recruitment is, the respect level for law enforcement, I believe, is not there like it was when I went into it. 40 years ago, if I took a juvenile out of my office, I would have to hold the parent back so they wouldn't assault the child in my presence. And now it's just the opposite. When you would take a child into the office, you would have to worry about being assaulted by the parent. So, everything has changed over the last 30 plus years that I've been in law enforcement, but the numbers as far as recruiting and retaining certainly has been a slow process, and unfortunately we weren't quick enough to catch it and to stop it.
Dr. Smith?
I agree that there needs to be some addressing of the compensation issues surrounding this. Is this on? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? If not, I'll yell. Thank you. I agree, compensation is absolutely an issue. And you can also incentivize individuals for pursuing additional education and training, because I think the reality is that some of the cultural issues between the police and the community stem from the fact that law enforcement officers receive a disproportionate amount of training that is contrary to their daily duties and activities. And when individuals have higher levels of training, education that's more in line with the work that they're actually doing, not only can they do that work more effectively, but they're less likely to experience the stress and burnout that other officers with less training, less education, less attention paid to all of the social service issues that are taking up a disproportionate amount of law enforcement's time. So I think it's a complex issue that has multiple things that can be done to, incentivize growing professionalism within the field, but also to appropriately compensate individuals who are, willing to lay their lives on the line to keep us safe.
Thank you. So we at the Libertarian Party are quite well known for being ardent and sometimes insufferable advocates of the free market. And I think one of the things that is a pretty uncontroversial topic in economics is that if you want to people to have more of your product, you want to offer a good quality product. Now, I see this issue as more of a fundamental understanding of what exactly the role of government ought to be and what the role of law enforcement is. Pennsylvania is actually accredited with having the very first state police force in the country, and that was at the turn of the 20th.
The citizens were surveyed recently on this exact question. And the conclusion by more than 50% of the population was that it's not that they need more police officers, it's that they need more engagement of the police officers. So, I like to think of this a little bit as, quantity and quality. We could add, another 100,000 officers to the Philadelphia Police Department, but if we're still asking them to do all of these things that are not aligned with the way that they're trained, and if they do so ineffectively and they are demonized, then that contributes to the negative police, citizen interactions. So I think it's a little bit of both. We need better, we need more officers, but we also need higher quality officers as well.
Representative Rick, you want to say one thing?
Yes, please, I'll just follow up on it, which goes back to needing more officers. If you have more officers that are walking the beats, you have that engagement, and we've lost that. I can talk about our city. I don't have to go to Philadelphia. We don't have a beat officer anymore. You have an officer that's also working as a detective and God knows what else. And so, so with more feet on the street, I'm not a fan of the eye in the sky and all this other crap. Give me guys on the ground that are walking and talking and looking at you face to face. I think that's how you start to cure the problem. Thank you.
When I quickly have to give you just one comment though.
Excuse me?
When I give you just one last comment on that.
All right, one last comment. We gotta move on to the next
I
topic.
couldn't agree more that we need to train and the officers more. When I found out that some of them enter with only just a couple of hours of training, and then the recurrence of training is so bare. We need to give our officers better tools. But things like walking a beat, getting them back into their community, associating with the people who they're serving, that's definitely the right path. Getting them understanding who the people are that they're serving, I think that will help them immensely. And I don't blame the officers either, I blame the policies and the job they're asked to do.
Just 2 seconds on that.
And I agree with you 100%. Walking the beat, being involved in the community, that builds relationships. I think Representative Rigby can tell you about that. If they had the time to do that, they don't have the time. We need more individuals, more law enforcement that are out there that have different specialized areas of, okay, maybe you're just with drug interdiction, maybe you're just with the schools, or maybe you're just with engaging the youth, just out and about in the playgrounds, building that relationship like it was back then. We put more officers on the streets, we can do that.
Okay, thank you, everybody. We do need to move on to the next topic, though. And this is something that Senator Langholtz actually brought up, talking about the sentencing that is given and how it's different in different parts of the state and whatnot. And of course, police are just one part of the system. As I mentioned, the most visible part, they're located on that front end. But on the opposite end of the system, right, as the senator mentioned, we have policies dealing with sentencing, punishment, and release. And it's worth noting that in this regard, and I have this up here, the United States is really unique among advanced democracies in this regard. We really distinguish ourselves from our peers, despite being the land of the free. The most recent World Prison Report, which was for 2021, shows the US with a far higher incarceration rate than any other nation on the planet. It's really not close when you compare us to Western Europe, Canada, Australia, and so forth. And not surprisingly, this mass incarceration disproportionately affects communities of color. Black males, 5.5 times more likely to be incarcerated than white males. Hispanic males are 2.5 times more likely than white males to be incarcerated. Now, it's worth noting, to be fair, incarceration rates have declined over the last 15 years, moderately, and that has, of course, disproportionately benefited those communities who have seen greater declines in incarceration rate. And this is also, just like with policing, not an easy issue to tackle, right? Broadly speaking, there's sort of two reasons you can think about for this high level of incarceration. That deals with front door policies this is determining which offenders are sent to prison, and backdoor policies, which are determining which offenders are released and when and under what circumstances and so forth. Since the 1970s, we have enacted policies that have increased both the number of people going in and reduced the number of people coming out. That includes things like mandatory minimums, the abolition of parole, truth in sentencing laws, 3 strikes laws, and perhaps most importantly to this, but most under the radar, is life without parole sentencing. Before the 1970s, life without parole was basically unheard of in this country. But as you can see here, since the 1990s, its use has proliferated to the point where there are now more people serving life without parole in the United States than there are in the entire rest of the world combined. I want you to just think about this for a minute. The United States possesses roughly 4% of the world's population, but 19% of worldwide prisoners, and the majority of those serving life without parole. As of 2020, 1 in every 25 American prisoners is serving a sentence of life without parole, and Pennsylvania is near the forefront of that. Pennsylvania abolished parole for life sentences in 1941. That's a little misleading. We used executive clemency through the 70s and early 80s to sort of address that issue.
century, but what did we do for law enforcement before that? We didn't have a law enforcement mechanism that was at odds with the public itself, that went out investigating, trying to find crime. The law enforcement was meant to serve warrants, and it was the courts who figured out who were the criminals after something happened. But when you don't understand the principles of liberty, allow people to do and associate as they want, the representative noticed that over the last 30 years, 40 years, he's seen quite a difference in the treatment of officers. And I think perhaps that has a lot to do with things like our drug policies, which take an act that wasn't even intended to be a crime in the country, tragic as it may be, and put officers out there investigating, trying to force an interaction for a good cause, but perhaps not the best result. So if we understand what the role of government ought to be and what the police can offer, we need to get them back in our communities, walking beats and not serving this investigatory at odds relationship with the communities they serve.
So to kind of follow up on what you're saying there, the U.S. of course is one of the most heavily policed democracies in the world. So are you suggesting that we may not need more police? Do we really need more police, I guess, is sort of the question?
Well, I think that, again, usually the market lets you know how many police we need. When you make things crimes that weren't intended to be crimes, things like victimless crimes, a crime was always intended to be somebody who was injured, but we've taken down the path for well-intended reasons to classify things as crimes that voluntary adults consenting we're allowed to do, even if it might be harmful to them. When you make things more and more things crimes, you're gonna have more and more crime. If we get policing and the criminal justice, the whole concept of what it's supposed to serve back to protecting liberty and property, and investigating crime after it happened, then we probably would need less but higher quality, well-trained investigative officers rather than the army of beat or patrol officers out there looking for a plant in someone's car.
Okay, so, and I want to give the other panelists a chance to respond to that, but to some extent, are you suggesting that maybe the problem might be that we're asking police to do too much? That
not too much, but the wrong thing. We're asking them to violate the right of people to associate freely as they would, as long as they're not harming anybody. And we're putting the police, we're not serving the police because we're asking them to do a job that was never intended for them to do, and which is fundamentally opposed to the ideas of liberty, which I hope is still what we're basing our idea of criminal justice on. It doesn't serve the communities because it creates countless felons and criminals, and push them through the process, which I'm not sure how much corrections is occurring in that arena. I think it's more that we're asking them to do a job that they should never have been asked to do, rather than that we're.
Okay. Representative Rigby's a former police chief, so I'd kind of like to hear his response to those thoughts.
I was hoping to hear an answer is whether or not we need more police. I think that was the question. I heard a dialogue that went on, and I didn't get the answer. When I look at what's going on in my community, but I look at what's going on in my city and in my county, I know that we are short in every department with manpower, and we see a spike in crime, we see a spike in the drugs, we see, well, maybe we shouldn't be patrolling that, let these drug dealers run the cities. Maybe that's what, I'm not sure where he's going, but I'm just kind of lost on this. I was hoping to hear an answer as to yes or no, whether we need police.
Dr. K, I have to step in. You said, are we
Okay.
expecting police to do too much? And we absolutely believe we are. Does anyone here watch On Patrol Live or Live PD anyone. It's like a favorite in my home. We are asking these folks to be mental health professionals, substance use treatment providers, tax collectors. Many of them were charged and got into this line of work to focus on like property and violent crime. And I think just watching, I think Friday night's episode of On Patrol Live, we saw in Wilkes-Barre an officer, working with Narcan for 45 minutes in a pretty big segment of the show. And so we think like these folks, it's kind of, I think of it in terms of like a Swiss Army knife, and they're trained to be the knife, but and focus on violent and property crime. And a Swiss Army knife's a great tool to have, but any of the things it does can be done better by one specific thing. And so yeah, like they're spread too thin, and I think refocusing the intent of what an effective criminal justice system is and what these individuals are being asked to sacrifice for is absolutely paramount.
I will add to this, since, sorry. So, yes, in my years, I've seen a lot. The academy taught me a lot. The CIT class I took, Crisis Intervention Training class, is something that's above and beyond what law enforcement is to do. We are now intervention people. We come in as specialists to try to defuse and bring down a situation. In the old days, it was a grab and go. We drag them out. We do what we had to do to end the situation. We now know that we can talk our way through a lot of things. It's not the old days of grabbing them in the headlock and dragging them out and throwing them in the back of a car. I mean, that was law enforcement when I got into it. It was my way and then the highway. Those days are gone. So as we move forward, 40 years in police, there's not one updated class I took in my 40 years that taught me how to go tell a parent their child was dead from an overdose. And I did it twice in less than 6 months, my first 6 months as the chief of police, and that's why I ran again for office, because I thought it was ridiculous. We've got kids dropping, juveniles, dead, overdose. And I better go tell their parents. Who teaches us how to do that? And then who do we go to after we do that to cope and deal with? And that's what law enforcement is doing with on a regular basis. So yeah, point the finger at law, we're bad, we shouldn't be enforcing the laws. That's what we were hired to do. And as long as we're a law of the land, then we'll continue to do that.
Senator Reinholz, it's your voice, so I'll give you the next word.
Well, there's a lot of issues that we could talk about, and we kind of went in a couple different directions. I guess, do we need more police? Yes, I think absolutely we need more police, 100%. I actually am in the process of introducing a bill to kind of mirror, actually, I believe what the governor even called on, to hire 2,000 more police officers across the state. I'm all for that, 100%. And with respect to, do police officers, are they doing too much? I mean, we absolutely have a mental health crisis on our hands, 100%. And I think we can argue, what is attributing to that. I mean, there's different factors. But, I'll point to one example. Ask the city of Philadelphia if they think they need more police.
Can I comment on that? Because they did, and that was the point I was going to make. Did you see the article from last week?
Well, I'm gonna develop this a little bit further
Okay.
here and tell you what.
Who's at the center section?
There's a background to that, and there's a resolution that happened to it. And I can tell you, I'm the chair of the Transportation Committee in the Senate, and had the opportunity to take the Transportation Committee to SEPTA last summer. I think it was last June, and to address issues, the rise in violent crime in SEPTA and the lack of prosecution of those individuals in Philadelphia. And just to go from the train station to SEPTA's headquarters, we had 2 plainclothes detectives with us to walk that far, just to deal, for safety purposes. I was there, I toured SEPTA with the committee, saw the videos of the crime that's occurring in SEPTA, the blatant violation of walking past the turnstiles, not paying. I mean, that's minor, that's not a major crime, but what that's doing is it's leading people to congregate in those areas and leading to violent crime, people being assaulted. I saw a lady get pistol whipped up the the steps, chased up the steps and pistol whipped by an individual who was a felon, who shouldn't even have had a gun. I said, you know, what happened to that individual? I talked to some of the detectives, some of the police officers aside after that, and they told me, so look, we're arresting these people and nothing's being done. They're being let out the same day, picking up one, it's like a revolving door. You know what that guy got for pistol whipping? A year of probation. The joke or the running joke around there is that if you arrest an individual in Philadelphia with a gun offense, it's a year of probation. That's what the going rate is there. And ask any of the attorneys in here that are defense attorneys, DAs, what the penalty is in Cambria County for that, and they'll tell you. It's 5 years just for that, right? And so that's a major issue. So, but that's kind of, I think, goes a little bit further than just the police. That also is a failure from the top down, that the district attorney in Philadelphia just blanketly refusing to prosecute people. But as a caveat to that, I did have the opportunity to talk with individuals from SEPTA post that hearing, and there have been steps that have been taken to increase that presence and to deal with that issue. And you know, they're making progress. They're still not there, and that's just SEPTA. That's the only reach that we had with the transportation committee. There's a whole host of other issues in Philadelphia with that district attorney that are going forward. But that's, you know, the circle to come back to the original point. Yes, I think we need more law enforcement. So that's why I sponsored that bill as well, and we're working through the logistics of that.
Dr. Smith, last word on this topic.
Thank you. I don't disagree at all, but I'm glad that Philadelphia was brought up because there are a host of very serious issues that are going on in Philadelphia, and they
Justice Club, and of course, my own self-advertising. You can take a criminal justice course. If you really want to know about these issues, I would suggest the Inside Out course, where we go into the prison to have class with inside students who are there, or stay connected with, you know, the research, the scholarship. Again, shameless self-plug, you can check out my book on Life Without Parole. But whatever you decide to read, whether it's my stuff or the senator stuff or the representatives or Americans for Prosperity, whatever it is, stay connected, stay engaged, and keep the conversation going. Thank you. Have a great night. Notice consideration seems very reasonable. Not all should be released, but second one is worth a shot. The lack of focus on rehabilitation in adult prison leads to the issue of high prison population. So I guess the question is, should adults be given a second chance like juveniles? I think is the question. Ashley, you want to start?
Yes, we believe they should, and I think, you know, here we go to like that question of, well, shouldn't we honor what a judge and jury decided? And I think, you know, we at AFP think of a sentence in terms of like what is due to the victim based upon the harm that was imposed, but then we also think about what is due to the community because of the violation of the law. And so that is part of the deterrent factor in a sentence. And so we think that portion of a sentence certainly should and can be reevaluated based upon rehabilitation. And I think it's just important to say, like, this does not mean any kind of automatic release mechanism is AFP's position. No, it should be a lot of different steps and series and you know, folks around the table in that conversation. But I certainly think that an opportunity for reevaluation is warranted.
Representative Rigby?
I would be in favor of that. I would need to know, again, what the crimes would be. You know, there's so many different judges with so many different rulings, and it's not as simple as it was A crime, A penalty, B crime, B penalty. They just don't have a book to look and say, this is what it is and this fits this, because if you look across our common law, the incarcerated, those that are incarcerated based on some of these crimes, much higher sentences, while lower sentences, some with no sentences. So, you know, I would look at it. I would, but again, there's no guarantee. It's not saying that I'm going to let you go, but I would say I don't have a problem with the second look.
All right, thank you. Senator?
I don't support second look for the reasons that I indicated prior, and I think there's a distinction of why they're juveniles, why it's a different system. If you you're looking at culpability, and you're looking at the means, you know, the mens rea of what they're able to form in their minds, and they're not quite that age yet, so. But again, I'll stand on my statements from the prior.
Thank you.
I've had 2 decades in as an adult probation and parole officer, and we're in the business of second chances, sometimes third, sometimes fourth. For a couple of reasons. You know, it incentivizes the inmate to do whatever it is they need to do to earn the opportunity of their release, not automatic release. But again, from a public safety and from a taxpayer perspective, you know, at the extent to which we're incarcerating someone beyond the time with which they are presenting a public safety risk, and beyond the time with which is sufficient for the crime that they served, it's all diminishing returns from there on out, and it's not a cost-effective way to handle that.
And lastly, Rob.
The number of people, elected people and other government officials who have discretionary authority over whether a person is going to have served their debt to society or not is ridiculous. We need to properly sentence people. We need to let them serve their time, and then we need to realize once they've served their debt, well, we no longer they don't have to pay interest on that by conditions afterwards. So we need to properly sentence people, and then we need to allow them to be people again through full restoration of felons' rights, and we don't really need the probation or parole process.
Right. My next 2 questions kind of go together as well. The first one is, how easy is it to obtain a good paying job after being released from prison? Dr. Smith, you want to start with that one?
Sure. 67% of inmates that are released do not have gainful employment within the first year that they're released. Beyond that, it gets even worse. Those that do have employment earn 27% less than their counterparts without a record. You know, as a probation and parole officer, I advocated for my clients in their employment applications because, you know, the employer knows that it's somebody who is being watched, being drug tested. Individuals that are under community supervision are often more reliable employees because they legally have to have gainful employment. But it is a Herculean task for somebody who is on community supervision, and it's a Herculean task for somebody who has completed all of that supervision but still has the publicly available criminal record that acts as a barrier in perpetuity, punishment in perpetuity. So we advocate for clean slate legislation, and if you want more information on our policy paper that was published on March 14th, please see that here.
All right, well, that actually kind of starts to answer the follow-up question. You gave the statistics there. And the follow-up question someone has here is, how do you think society can destigmatize past convictions? If you do not agree with destigmatizing past criminal past, please elaborate as well. So I guess you're going to talk about the clean slate, obviously.
So clean slate legislation is a model policy that has bipartisan support, bicameral support, and the support of 70% of the American population. Simply meaning that, based on the research, after somebody has been able to remain crime-free for a certain period of time, they are less likely than their counterparts who have never had a criminal record to commit crime. So we need people to be able to desist from that criminal identity, and the only way to do that is to open up avenues through clean slate legislation. Basically just takes the arrest and conviction off of the internet. Doesn't, you know, justice professionals can still access that information, but, you know, getting it off of, you know, the internet so that they have a chance at legitimate employment, so they can secure housing, education, and everything that they need.
Right, and just to finish up on this, because we're running out of time, I'd like to hear the other panelists' thoughts on destigmatizing post-release. Rob, would you like to go next quickly?
It is not our communities that have an issue with this. It is the authorities that have an issue with post-conviction. They don't give the opportunity to people who have served their debt. People in the communities are the ones offering the help, the rides to work, the place to live, giving them a chance and hiring them. So the authorities seem to be the ones who have the biggest issue allowing the reintegration of an incarcerated individual. So we need to just return them to their communities and stop trying to ask, well, are they really ready? Because that's too much power for one person to have over the ability of a person to meaningfully exist.
Senator?
Yes, I think it's very hard I agree 100%, it's very hard for individuals to find employment. Again, why I sponsored legislation to help give incentives to employers for those that are battling addiction or dealing with, drug offenses, possession, things of that nature. And also the Clean Slate Law, which Governor Wolf signed into law, but it is obviously not to the extent I think that you're talking about, but it has, deals with misdemeanor 3s, misdemeanor 2s, I think, off the top of my head.
Yeah, we advocate for state level.
Yours
Yes.
is a step further, I think, from that. But again, so I represent 3 counties, Cambria, Clearfield, Center County. There's not a place that I've gone in my district over the past, since I've been elected, over 6 years, where employers aren't telling me we would hire 10 more people, we'd hire 10 more welders, we could hire 10 more production people. The jobs are there. They're there. There used to be, when we would run for office, we're gonna bring jobs to this area, we're gonna bring jobs. We have the jobs. We don't have the workforce to fill them. We need to connect those dots, and we can do it through common sense legislation like that. And in the end, everybody wins, because then you're off of state assistance, you're off of parole, and you're being a gainful member of society, and you're being a productive member of society.
Representative Rigby?
Short answer is yes.
And I guess, Ashley, you get the last word today. Unfortunately, there are a couple questions we did not have time to get to, and I apologize to those couple people.
Sure, yeah. I would say when we think about the key institutions of society as being community, business, education, and government, this is where business and community has to step in. And the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry has done an exemplar job of scaling success stories of certain businesses across the Commonwealth that are really committed to hiring folks with a criminal background. And I think that's really the key to destigmatizing this. I've seen businesses take out ads saying they welcome folks with a record. I think that's awesome, and they're obviously doing that because they've realized success in hiring people that have had a background that was, many would say is defined by one of the worst mistakes of their whole life. And for a lot of crimes, that should not dictate the rest of your professional life, and certainly not the rest of your personal life. So I think really this is not an issue so much for government, but more as for business and community.
Thank you very much, and I would like to thank again all of our lovely panelists for their time tonight. So if you could please thank our panelists. And I would again like to remind the audience, what I said at the beginning is that tonight should be the start of a conversation. Obviously, it was a little bit long-winded than I had intended, but that happens. So you should go home, share what you heard, share what you learned with friends, with family. Remain engaged in the conversation. Get off of TikTok and check other sources, as the senator suggested. But stay connected, right? Use good, credible sources. You can follow your elected officials at these 2 websites here. You can contact them at those websites as well. You can connect with tonight's hosts, Americans for Prosperity, at their website. I've also put up here the Pennsylvania Libertarian Party's webpage, since they're here. The Pennsylvania Democratic Party webpage, the county party webpage is there. The County Republican Party did not appear to have a webpage that I could find, but they do have a Facebook page. You can follow them on Facebook. I know, I just said get off social media. So you have the Cambria County Republican Committee on Facebook, Cambria County Democratic Party on Facebook, Libertarians of Cambria County, Libertarians of Somerset, Cambria, Indiana counties, Americans for Prosperity, of course, the UPJ Criminal Justice Club. You can join a club if you are a student here, whatever meets your interest. Their Instagram handles, UPJ Republicans, UPJ College Dems, UPJ Criminal